Welcome back from the break. Up next, we have a very exciting panel discussion, Reconstructing Leadership, the Roundtable.
The global pandemic has placed extraordinary pressure on business leaders and beyond, which leads us to these three essential questions. How do leaders encompass a resilient mindset during these turbulent times? How will the hospitality industry continue to respond to severe labor shortages? And will this strenuous leadership test make organizations more successful in the long run? To answer these, I leave the stage to our panelists and welcome our moderator, Professor Hidari. He is an esteemed professor of corporate strategy here at EHL, an expert in his field. And just for our delegates and audience, don't forget to submit any questions you may have before the end of the panel. Mr. Hidari, are you joining us from Lausanne today?
I am. I'm in my office, thankfully, here on the campus.
Excellent. We're so excited to hear what you have to say. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, it's actually not me that you should be excited to hear from, but this esteemed panel. And I think that's the first time anybody ever called me esteemed. So thanks for that. This is a great honor to once again moderate a panel for YHS. I think this is the 10th out of 11 years that I've been able to do this, and it's always a pleasure to do so. I've got four great people with me, and I think everybody's probably looked a little bit at their biographies, or hopefully have, or their LinkedIn profile. So rather than have everybody give a long introduction to themselves, what I'd like is for each person to give me in 1 minute or less. What I really want our audience to take away from this minute is, what is it you actually do in your job? Not what's the title or how did you get here, but what do you actually do in this great role that you have? And then I'll follow up with another little question after. I'm going to start with Marloes and just, give it to us. What do you actually do? Because I've known you for a while now. I still don't know what you do.
We're a mixed-use operating company. So my daily job, I find new assets, build together a team, drink a lot of tea with new owners. And because what we're doing is new age, innovative, and hasn't been done yet, a lot of my days are filled with innovation, communications, connecting the team together. I think if you ask them, probably they would say driving them crazy with the repetition of, what we're aiming to do. And I think what we're doing a little different than others is we're really looking at profit per square meter and collaborations with other entities. So instead of just being an operator and looking at ourselves, my days are filled with these kind of initiatives, collaborating with universities, collaborating with partners and other people to bring together and bring to life hubs and communities that call themselves hospitality.
Perfect answer. I've got 3 follow-up questions. We'll get to them a little bit later. Jeff from Ohio. Jeff, tell us what you do in your job.
Well, I worry a lot. I worry about protocols for COVID at the venues in the markets that we have our conferences. Our company puts on hotel investment conferences around the world. We have major ones in LA, in Singapore, in Sydney, Miami, etc. So we're all about getting people together in person. This is fine, but I would much rather be in person with all of you to interact, and I think everyone feels that way. So we've had several live in-person conferences. We just had one in Los Angeles in January where we had about 1,900 people convened for the America's Lodging Investment Summit. So we're getting back on track. So now it's about forging programs, getting sponsorships, working with the venue to ensure that everything goes smoothly. Fortunately, I have a great team, and so it's more about just answering questions and let them do their thing.
Right. And just a real quick question: how many people work for your organization?
We have 7 in our BHN division, but we are part of North Star Travel Group, which has about 325 employees around the world.
Okay, great. And Lucy, you're fading in and out. So if you are there, and if you could unmute yourself, maybe you could tell us what you do in your daily work. All right, I'm going to move on to Thomas, and we'll see if we get Lucy back in a little while. Thomas, over to you. Tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, ultimately, I'm in the business of human capital. So Ethos Consulting Group is first and foremost focused on the hospitality and real estate sectors. So what we do is we really partner with hotel owners, investors, developers, or operators, but at the same time also with any other sort of lodging providers. So that could be student housing, senior living, cruise companies, other hospitality sectors such as contract catering firms and things of that nature. And we really work with them to better align their business strategies with their HR strategies. First and foremost, I must admit, it's on the recruitment side. So we really sort of try to firstly assess what is it that they need from a specific vacant position, what kind of individual succeeds in their company culture, and then we go out and find that person, secure that person. That oftentimes entails also that we help the organization put together the right compensation and benefit programs. So how do you attract someone at the right price for your organization? And then I'd say probably most recently, we've spent a lot more time helping organizations to better improve their internal selection recruitment processes to provide, let's call it, data-driven decision factors to understand who works well for the organization and basically fast track the decision-making process. That's in a brief nutshell what this is all about.
Perfect. I want to make sure that the audience knows that we're taking questions throughout the discussion rather than only at the end. So please put forward your question. If you want it to be to a specific person, let us know. If not, I'll sort of play around with the different panelists and make sure everybody gets the chance to answer the questions. All right, let me go to this first question. From the introduction to the panel, our MCs mentioned obviously the pandemic, and I don't want this whole hour to be pandemic focused, but let me get that sort of out of the way if we can. What's changed in the last year, in your opinion, about leadership, either from your personal experience or what you're noticing with the organizations that you work with because of these last 2 years? How has leadership changed? How have leaders changed? And let's talk with that word resilience first, which Aradna, who was our keynote just before us, mentioned quite a bit. So if you could talk a little bit about resilience or whatever else you see in terms of changing, in terms of leadership and leaders. Thomas, you went last, so you're going to go first this time.
Thank you. Gosh, let's start with resilience. Yes, it's super important. And I think it's definitely hand in hand in regards to leadership conversations. I have to admit, in the recent past, a lot of the conversations that I've been sort of privy to or been part of, they single-mindedly focused on resilience, defining it as you want a leader who is resilient, and that's it, and nothing else. I'm sort of thinking that's probably not what this is all about. Yes, the pandemic has shown that we need someone who can withstand pressure, but it has also shown that you can't just have someone who quickly tries to solve problems in the here and now to then go back to where we were before. So I come at it from a different perspective. I think for me, resilience in leadership is a broader topic. Resilience is part and parcel of a servant leader. And for me, I always encourage companies and individuals to think about servant leadership. What does that mean? And the different character traits. So resilience is part of that, but there are many others, from emotional intelligence to being, first and foremost, to be honest, pragmatic. Someone who is very adaptable, nimble, someone who knows how to basically deal with a situation where they constantly have to deal with conflicting forces, being analytical, but also strategic, being very decisive, yet taking the time to listen to your team. Is this sort of the direction that you wanted to take? Or?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm actually going to turn to Marloes now and say, can you give me an example of what Thomas is talking about here in terms of your personal leadership at your organization? Give me an example where you had to be resilient, where maybe before you didn't, and this idea of conflicting needs and how did you manage that? Basically give us a conflict you were facing, Marloes, and how did you resolve that? And what did you learn about yourself from that?
I like that. It's almost like I'm job interviewing.
Yes.
I think actually it's maybe even opposite for us. So I think what's helped us is because we've always been working remote. So I built up my teams since the beginning based on skill set and talent, not based on location. So I think what has really changed, and with regards to if you want resilience and everything else, is I think the piece that is the most complicated is the communications piece. And I think there's more organizations that might actually need a chief of staff nowadays, somebody who glues together what's happening. And one of our advantages has always been we don't have coffee machine dramas because we're not together all day. And so we only bring people together on project, but not that much more. But as you grow, and now so many other organizations are doing this, you see that people like to work remote. They like to have the freedom. They like to be somewhere else, but still they want to be engaged. They want to know everything. And that's something that I think is expected to be fed from the top. Not necessarily people feel the responsibility that they have to, where you normally go and walk into your colleague's office. There is not a natural kind of, let me call whomever is whomever and ask them what they're doing, how that connects to me, if there's something we should do together, just for people to kind of grab that information. And I think, if it's COVID or the whole political situation at the moment, the importance of ESG has become so much more up onto the surface. So, for example, with the whole, and I will not go through, opinions and everything, but for example, we were really quiet as soon as the war happened. And actually, it's the first time I didn't really know what to do. And it's so much easier when you're with your teams together. And after a couple of days of being silent online, and we had so much positive things happen over the last, say, 2 weeks, which we haven't shared just out of respect. But I think sometimes when you put your head in the sand, it's even worse for the teams. So we started just having that conversation and discussion on our WhatsApp group. And I think as a leader, what Thomas refers to as resilience, I think you're forced to think deeper and more about the processes and who you connect together and what is happening. And you become more a facilitator and a coordinator, much more, I believe, than a leader necessarily.
Okay. And you made an interesting point there that I want to ask Jeff about, and then we'll bring in Lucy after that. You mentioned you didn't know what to do. And I think, and I want to ask Jeff, did when you were in California last month for Alice, and you had these 1,900 people attending, and you probably spoke to 1,000 of them at least, I'm sure. Did you get a sense of this, that people are more vulnerable, admitting vulnerability, admitting that they haven't known what to do over the past 2 years? Because we tend to think of leaders as always knowing what to do, never admitting a mistake or never admitting uncertainty. How has your impression of leadership from the people you've been interacting with at the conferences changed in the last 2 years?
That's a great question. It's resiliency. What I've found is that resiliency has to go hand in hand with creativity, with transparency, and with flexibility now more than ever. And I think the one thing that the feedback that I get from the people that we talk to at Alice and other conferences is that transparency is so important. And not knowing what to do often is a result of what Marloes said about the communication factor, not knowing what to do because you don't know the details. And those details, that may be because you're not in the office. It may be because, everyone is so spread out. There's not a chance to just get to yell down the hall and say, hey, let's meet. We've got an issue. Let's deal with it. So finding that right mix for the creativity part of it, how can we do this in a different way but still get the same results that we've had in the past? What the flexibility of this may be something that I've never done before because I never thought it was right, but now given the situation I have to be flexible and it is right. And then the transparency is essential, because it's not only the leaders that are looking for that information, but it's everybody. And the more people or the less people know, the more confusion there is. So I think the key to the leadership aspect of it that I've found talking to people is transparency, trying to make sure everyone knows as much as possible to help them get through the day, get through the week, and get through the project.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up, and feel free, anybody can jump in. Do you think, and this is a debate I've been having on my show Rise and also with my students, these changes that we're seeing in behavior, right? The resilience, or the emphasis on this, the vulnerability, the need to be more transparent. You think we're still going to be seeing this 5 years from now in a hopefully, far, far post-pandemic world? Or are we going to go back to the old ways? And what will we have learned from this that will have a long-lasting impact? Just a quick comment on that, Jeff.
I don't think we'll go back to the old way. I think it's clear to me that employees like this flexibility. They like this transparency. They like this creativity. So the issue is going to be forced by the employees, the prospects saying, no, I'm not going to take that job unless I can do this, this, and this, because, particularly with this, with the delegates here, they're coming into the workforce. That's what they're going to know. And that's what's going to dictate it. Couple that with the labor shortage, and you have an environment where the employee is more in control than ever because of what we're experiencing now.
Great, and I seem to have lost Lucy. Now you're back, Lucy. If you can really quickly unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about what is it you do in your work.
Absolutely. I apologize for the unstable internet connection in Hong Kong. So I'm based in Hong Kong with Rosewood Hotel Group, and I lead commercial, which is essentially all of the sales, marketing, and revenue management across our brands. So we have around 50 properties, 3 hotel brands, and 2 standalone concepts: a social club and a wellness concept.
Okay, and what is it you actually do? Like a day in the life of Lucy at work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm really working with our teams, who are in market, to make sure that, we have the right strategy in terms of pricing of the hotels, the sales channels activated, evolving our digital presence. So looking at brand.com and how we evolve beyond just selling hotel rooms to add on experiences, and then looking at partnerships and also the customer journey, and also working on our development pipeline. We're growing quite quickly.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to jump to Thomas, and I'm going to come back to Lucy in a minute. Thomas, Jeff, again, made a couple interesting points that I'd like to explore. Yeah. One was, we're not going to go back to the way things were because people are used to this now, whatever this is, right? Whether it's flexibility or working from home or transparency or vulnerability in their leaders. And second, the employees are in a stronger bargaining position, if we want, because there's this great resignation and leaving the industry. So those 2 things in mind, what are you noticing as you are interviewing people for positions, or when companies are advertising positions? What's changing in terms of what we're looking for in our jobs, and what's changing and what we're looking for in the people that are going to fill those positions, especially at the higher levels?
Okay. Well, firstly, what you referenced in regards to Jeff's last comment, look, I think ultimately agree things will not go back to normal, because ultimately I think people have hopefully recognized that a stable business environment is not to be expected. So what you have to do is expect the unexpected. Therefore means you need to be nimble, adaptable, flexible, i.e. the pragmatic, resilient leader, and not just purely the resilient leader. In regards to what are people looking for, employees versus employers, gosh, it's a broad topic. So let's start with the employees at a corporate level. I think at a corporate level, actually, I would argue that labor shortage is slightly less urgent than at a property level, for example. So there are different conversations to be had. At a corporate level, I can definitely tell that from our conversations with the market, a lot of individuals are questioning, do I really need to relocate to head office X, Y, or Z if I subsequently will have to anyway travel for 30 or 50% of my time So why go through the trouble of actually relocating my family, uprooting them, and then be somewhere where we don't have a social network? That is actually a very big priority. And that is causing a lot of problem, is perhaps too big of a word, but it is a concern to the employers, because I think the employers are still playing catch up, because whilst they theoretically would like to, or the majority, try to, address those potential concerns from the employees, it does carry certain implications from a company culture point of view. You suddenly have to make sure that, if person X, who is a new joiner, gets to work remotely, well, guess what? Then the person who's worked for us for 20 years suddenly also gains that right. And that's quite a significant shift. So I think there are a lot of conversations to be had between leadership and HR to align those views and best practices. Because ultimately, what you want to make sure as an employer is to be able to make quicker hiring decisions in order to not lose people in a competitive environment. And I think you need to make sure that you work on all these different components to know where can we be flexible in order to address the potential concerns from the employees, to then make quicker decisions. So that's just one small example.
But it has to be capability, right? The capability to wanting to change and the capability to oversee how you're going to manage your business. I mean, it's not just a matter of deciding that you're going to do this, because even to Jeff's points, and I'm nodding, will everything go back to normal? No, of course not. But then realistically, when you listen of everybody's tired, everybody wants to be together again, communications is a problem, everything is tougher and harder. And, the list of problems versus, the list in like 2 years ago of, all the stuff that we wanted to change and wanted to do different. I think there might be a change. Sorry, Thomas, to interrupt, but, there might be a change in the people, the younger generations of work. If you look at some of the younger tech companies, so one company that just did a vacation whenever you want to. And I'm sure if you put the responsibility at people themselves, if you take 3 months vacation, well, go and work somewhere else, right? But if you think you need to work 3 months straight and, you take, it's this kind of give and take. I don't think it can just be set by rules and regulations and, it just, you want to do this because it really comes with pain. And if you do this, then you really, it's like setting up your own company. It's very funny and so great the first 4 weeks. And then after 3 months, you're really thinking like, I'm not sure I wanted this. And so you really have to commit to wanting to do this, not just as this, romantic idea.
I think that's the right point to raise, right? It's about the commitment, but it's also appreciating that smaller firms may have it slightly easier to do that than the bigger firms. And then with the bigger firms, it becomes a question of alignment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the biggest discrepancy is between what the business leaders perhaps, or the regional leaders may need and see from the market what they need to do, versus what perhaps a centralized, HR function is enabled or allowed to do. So it's not necessarily the fault of HR, nor is it the fault of business leaders, but it's about the misalignment between the two, and or the fact that actually HR is being torn in a different direction than the business actually what it needs.
Well, and if I can jump in one last thing, there's so much shifting now, especially as we get back to normal, whatever normal is going to be, things that maybe hadn't been considered completely because they hadn't been experienced, but things like onboarding new employees, doing that remotely versus doing that in person, there's a huge difference there. And, with the delegates here going into the workforce, how do they find mentors? How do they really get onboarded and learn the intricacies of how to do the job, not just doing the job, but how to get there, what, you learn from people that are sitting next to you. And, to me, that's probably the biggest challenge of the next phase of our recovery is as we do start filling these positions, particularly at the corporate level, that onboarding scenario is going to be really important to figure that out. And if everybody's spread out all over, that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And I'm going to come to Lucy with a question about that in just 20 seconds. I think she's going to join us just with audio. I'd like to encourage the students that are watching to either put a comment or a question, because Jeff's point about, onboarding new people, a lot of these students are going to be graduating in 6 months or a year, and obviously entering an industry that's far different from what it was before the pandemic, but also organizations that are very different than they were before. The way they look at their human capital, the way they bring them on board, the way they're going to treat them. Jeff, you mentioned before we went on air that you didn't relocate to California when you changed jobs. That was, you didn't see the need to do that. Marloes is talking about the fact that her organization has been all remote from the beginning. And so these students who have been learning a very traditional view of hospitality and then suddenly hit with this pandemic, and I've talked about this in my class, some of the stuff we've been teaching is no longer relevant, especially on the organizational behavior, communication, human resources side. So I'd love to hear from the students what they think about this, either questions or comments. And I guess while we'll wait for that, Lucy, at Rosewood, I know things have been different in Hong Kong. You have a very different, and I think you guys are having a major issue right now and lockdowns, et cetera. What have you noticed has changed in the way Rosewood has done to attract people and retain people and incorporate them into the organization during this crisis? Where's the leadership come from to help people feel welcome and important in the organization?
Yeah, so I think Rosewood's done several things. The first is we realize that intrinsically people's motivation around why they join a company and why they stay with a company has changed. And, it's not just about a job, it's about being a purpose-driven organization that really kind of resonates for people and they feel connection. And so we launched something called a calling. And I joined Rosewood around 4 months ago and sort of spent my first couple of months traveling around the world, meeting different hotel teams. And I saw this come to life every morning where, the teams would get together and really share stories about guests and what was motivating them around providing service and connecting with each other. So we've really instilled that calling. I heard several of the other panelists talking about resilience. We've developed a series of frameworks and tools to help the teams develop that muscle of resilience, which I think is, increasingly important. But then we've also been agile, right? So our headquarters is in Hong Kong, but then we have, around 12 offices around the world, and we've kind of moved people around, as needed to be able to be on the properties and kind of travel freely, where historically, it was more centralized. So I think, challenges provide opportunities to kind of relook at things and do things different ways.
Thanks. So we've had a question come in, which actually links to this idea of being less centralized. And the comment is about leadership being strongly connected to organizational structure. And the hotel industry, especially, but maybe all of the hospitality, has always been very hierarchical, almost like a military, right? And I remember 25 or 30 years ago, it was more so, where you would have an executive, then an executive vice president, a senior vice president, assistant senior vice president, vice president, assistant vice president, and even within a hotel, right? A front desk clerk, a front desk supervisor, front desk assistant, front desk manager, front desk director. And it was just a way to get people to be promoted within organizations and stay within the organization. Very hierarchical. Are we seeing an end to that? Are we seeing a chance to become less hierarchical, not just more decentralized, but less hierarchical, more egalitarian within organizations? Or is the hotel industry destined to remain hierarchical with a leader and then lots of levels? Let's go to Marloes first. What do you think about that?
I think there's probably a drive and an admiration to be less hierarchical. I think if you want to be less hierarchical, it comes with changes from the beginning till the end, right? To say you're less hierarchical and you cut certain positions out, that doesn't mean that you are going to be less hierarchical. If you're going to give people the opportunity to be included, that means that you have to look at meeting schedules and include other people. That means that you should be exposed to other divisions, which means that you need to look at uniform changes. That means that, the whole process of what you're doing and where you're doing it becomes very different. And then you have the different geographies where in certain geographies, even the countries culturally, it's so hierarchical. It's not just something from the industry. And I still remember the good old times where Hilton had this first name policy. Yeah, it was really awkward in some parts of the world, and in other parts of the world, it was fantastic to say, "Hey, Jeff." And, it was kind of, it's, I think what we talk about agility, but we use the word empowerment at the beginning of the conversation. And I think if you want to make these changes, you have to give this vision and direction as an organization from, let's say, the top or head office. But even when we talk about head office, is that the organ that takes all of the decisions, or is that a support function? And I think even there is such a big question about that. And yes, it's easier for a smaller organization, right? Because we're making our head office the support function. If you go and I always like to use this example, when you go and take an Uber, the Uber driver rates you and you rate the Uber driver. It's actually really weird, but it's not that you're sitting there looking how he drives, but it's just you're kind of, he provides a service and you have a certain level of behavior. When we have a visit of a regional person, for example, there is no conversation that way. You just take it as it comes. And I think that comes back again to there's certain things that are not talked about. And if you want to do this, and we're going through this for months already, because we're now at a position where we have 10 openings still going on for this year. We just signed 5 projects in just, the first 2.5 months of the year. And so all of a sudden you go through process, and the processes need to be based on, what we're selling, what we're preaching, what we're standing for, which means that you need to get people out of the comfort of what they're used to. And that means that every single process that somebody ever knew, you have to look at and see if they can take that decision themselves, if they can take that on, if they need somebody to supervise, and then you need them to check. It's this whole shitty rule of it's what you inspect, not what you expect. It's just human, right? It's not in our industry. So can we? Yeah, but it will come with, it will come more. It's more than just a statement, and it's more than just an admiration or a dream.
Okay.
Maybe just playing the devil's advocate, if I may. I certainly agree with you, Marloes, that it's a lot easier for smaller firms to be, less hierarchical and flatter in terms of their organizational structure. But we work with, also quite a fair number of very large organizations. And I think we're doing a disservice here to just say everyone is very hierarchical or very bureaucratical. A lot of companies are trying to change. A lot of companies actually have done so already. And you can tell that quite often either regions or certain functions are very empowered and they're very flat, and they love that. And then when we work with them, they say, look, we need someone who can be very agile, who's entrepreneurial, but they need to know how to work within an organization where sometimes bureaucracy is still there, right? Mm-hmm. So it takes time to change a behemoth, if you'd like. Yes. So that's one comment I think that's worthwhile to keep in mind. And then we keep on talking about the hotel industry. And Damien, you said hotels are very hierarchical traditionally. Again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. Not all hotels are the same, right? So I'm thinking, hey, think of a Hoxton, think of a Moxie. They're very flat in the structure. People are very empowered. And then if we look at the broader lodging space, hey, what about student housing? They're very flat. They may have maybe 10 people at a property. So it's, I would encourage people to think a little bit more nuanced about the hospitality industry and careers within, organizations. Jeff, I think you wanted to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I still think that the hotel industry, it's all about what Marloes was saying about Uber. It's all about the experience, right? And what you come away with that experience as the consumer is of the utmost importance. So if you don't have processes and some sort of hierarchy in place to establish what those processes are and what the end result is going to be, It most certainly varies at different types of properties. It's different at a Ritz-Carlton versus a Hampton Inn, right? So there's going to be varying degrees of that hierarchy throughout an organization. But I think it will always be there because it has to be to provide the end product in a consistent manner that most brands are built upon these days.
So that raises a couple of issues. One, it's about whether brands are going to change, a little bit about this and what people are expecting. But I want to take it a slightly different route. And there's a couple of comments that are coming from the students linked to something that Thomas said earlier, and Marloes as well, in terms of this hierarchy and upward mobility of staff. So the question for me is, if we're struggling to hire frontline employees who we will say, and in one of the comments from a student, it's, is upward mobility in hotel organizations really just a PR stunt, right? Because we'll always hear about that one person who worked their way up from bellboy and is now the CEO. But for everyone like that, there's 100,000 who didn't get past, front desk manager or assistant, F&B manager, et cetera. So if we're having trouble hiring these people and getting them to stay in the organization, is the idea of upward mobility even going to be even less of a reality? And who will be the next leaders within hotels and within hospitality organizations if we can't bring them up because we can't get them to come or to stay? So that's my kind of question, comment. Thomas wants to take that.
Yeah, can I speak for an hour? No, look, let me start with one element. So firstly, I think it's a question of adjusting expectations. So I think a lot of the times companies, for example, come to us to say they want someone who's been there, done that before. And I think I get the rationale behind it, but it's not the most innovative approach, nor is it the right approach from a cost perspective, quite frankly, because oftentimes these individuals are expensive. So the employers need to adjust their expectations in that regard and provide up-and-comers with an opportunity. To do that, they need to focus on what do you need to do the job. And quite often it's not based on task performance, but actually contextual performance. So what do you bring to the table to perform within an organization and within the specific function? And those are often character traits, behaviors, not skills that you can learn, because skills you can very quickly pick up, most of the skills. That's one element. And I lost a little bit of my train of thought, but I think that's something to start with. The other aspect I would raise as it relates to the employees is to say, well, don't just look in one little box. Again, hospitality is a massive industry. Look at other hospitality players. Oftentimes, and actually there was the employer expectation service, right, that you guys did the YHS. And I was very surprised to see that a lot of students want to go luxury, big brand. It's like, you're looking for empowerment, you're looking to move up very quickly. Guess what? A lot of the times, and maybe Lucy can speak to that, I don't want to pigeonhole, but a lot of the luxury players are very regimented and it takes time to move up. But if you join an owner operator or a white label operator, you have a lot more opportunity a lot quicker most of the times. I'm generalizing, but I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, 3 quick comments before I sort of shift to Lucy. One, Thomas, you were my student, God knows how many years ago. Back then, it was also, the students also wanted to go into luxury in the big brands. For me, that has not changed. And I think what your point is, it may be time, that it has to change. And like you, I'm forgetting my train of thought as well. So let me jump over to Lucy and say, Lucy, Thomas is talking a little bit about we can't generalize organizations, et cetera. But if we talk about an Asian company, luxury, relatively big player, do you find that your organization is slower to adapt to the new needs of young people and what they're looking for in organizations? Or are you able to, can you give us an example of how Rosewood is specifically addressing this labor issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually joined Rosewood from Google. So I was at Google for 7 years leading the travel business. And, I have been really pleasantly surprised at how kind of innovative and disruptive Rosewood is, I think on a couple of levels and angles, right? So I think the first is we really focused on the customer and understanding the affluent customer and how their journey is changing and what that means in terms of when they travel, right? So beyond hotel rooms, what are they looking for in terms of experiences or partnerships with luxury brands? And so that I think is quite exciting and compelling. And I think secondly, on the employee front, I mentioned that we launched something called The Calling, which really linked to being a purpose-driven organization and kind of letting each employee be their authentic selves. And I think, we talk about progression and development, which is incredibly important. I think instilling the sense of employees being entrepreneurs, right? They kind of own the role that they're in and they're empowered to do it to the best of their ability. But also having a strong practice around coaching and development and clarity around what progression looks like and what they need to do to get to the next level, and having strong frameworks around mentorship. One of the things that I've done as I've kind of joined the organization is reverse mentorship, right? As I've been traveling around different properties, I've met employees that are junior but incredibly passionate and competent, and we'll have regular sort of check-ins with them where I can help them progress, but I can actually learn from them, being on property in the field, having observations. And so I think organizations do have an important role to play around getting the structure in place to support people's growth, but also, as we would term at Google, 20% projects where employees can kind of surface new ideas, which might end up being new business lines or new ways of doing things. And, in turn, enable them to be entrepreneurs and potentially have faster growth within the organization if the ideas are successful. So those are some of the things we're doing.
That's great. And hopefully that's working out. And, over the years that I've been teaching here, I often will come across organizations that are trying this. Or I don't know if it's still happening, but before the pandemic, these shadow boards where we would have all these 25 to 30-year-olds making decisions alongside the board. And again, I'm not sure how valuable these were. Hopefully really valuable. I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to come at you, Jeff, with a couple of quick questions and quick answers, hopefully. Alice Conference, Los Angeles, 1,900 people. I've been to these conferences before. It's bankers, it's hotel owners, it's investors, it's developers, it's the brands. Usually, they'd ask me to come and have that panel about young people or talent, because kind of have to talk about those things. But no one would ever really come to those because there was no money to be made, no deals to be made. Was there a change this year? How important is the labor issue? We know it's important to the industry, but how important was it at the conference? Was there sincere discussion about this, or was it still secondary to cap rates and interest rates and land for sale?
Oh no, it's front and center. It's front and center. And I will say, previous to this job, I was in the news side of the business, right? With Hotel News Now, I was 20 years covering these conferences. And really prior to the pandemic, I'd say maybe 8 or 9 years ago, there was a fundamental shift with the way CEOs approach this. Prior to that, you would never hear the talk about labor or people on stage. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, that started shifting. That was a big topic. So it's obviously with the situation now, it's become even more important. And every CEO talks about the importance of labor, how to, how they can find people from entry-level positions at their property to somebody for the accounting department at corporate level. And none of them have had the answers. The people. Some of them have shared ideas. I mean, they're going to bus stops and finding people with uniforms, going to another industry, and they approach them and say, "We'll pay you more if you come work for us." And that person makes that decision on the fly. So their whole fundamental line of thinking has changed, and it does show up in the conversations at the investment conferences. Absolutely.
All right. And all right, a lot of questions about that, but I think maybe we have some other things. I had another question from one of the students asking. We've seen over the last 2 years, very cyclical industry, very unstable, very subject to changes in economic and political situations. A lot of firms, and again, Thomas, I don't want to generalize too much, but a lot of firms are relatively quick to have to lay off or furlough a lot of people in order to survive. And that's another issue of leadership, having to make those tough decisions. But now you've got all these options, and you're looking at this industry saying, well, they were quick to lay people off. The wages aren't great. Their wages are going up now only because people have to pay us more to get us to come back or stay. Not a great example for people looking to join an industry. So how do we as an industry, not just you as an individual, motivate people to once again, come to this industry or stay in it? And I don't want the answers about passion and service and et cetera. Concretely, how do we get these people? Because I've got students every day telling me, I thought I wanted to do hospitality, and these 2 years have convinced me that there's no point in doing this. And that's a big concern for people spending quite a bit of money.
Right. What was the percentage before that were still in the hospitality industry of the graduates? I mean, even at the hotel school, The Hague, the amount of percentage when I was going to school was already like this discussion. I'm not sure this discussion has changed.
Well, I think it's getting worse because it was always, I think we always used to throw out this 50% number, but it depends how we define hospitality, et cetera. What I've got is people saying, I still love the industry. I just now realize that I don't trust the industry. I don't trust that I'm going to be able to develop and grow here because I'm worried about the industry per se. So, and I know numbers are going up, people are still traveling and leisure's been there, et cetera. But in terms of motivating people to want to rejoin or stay in the industry, give me 30 seconds on this, Marloes.
No, I think it's even tech companies, if you look at Google or Amazon or, all the big organizations, I think it's across the board, whatever industry you were in. I think many people have that about their own industry. I think the point that Lucy was making, it's one of the things I would say at our organization is Lucy's talking about personal connections. And if that's reverse mentorship or traveling or listening to both sides, or if people are really much more focused on staying with other people, where before the conversation was about if robots take over, then people will no longer have a job and it should not happen because people want this personal engagement. And yeah, every single time we talk about it, every 9 months to 12 months, this whole conversation changes. And I think there's a great opportunity when you look today, when you fly, there's so many airports nowadays where there's these big advertisement panels coming up. Before they were about investing, banks, real estate, and whatever. Now they're about, you can have teams all over the world and you just contract them through one platform, and so people can travel, everything. I think what we're talking about in head office and the flexibility we're allowing people and giving people at head office level is still much more than we do on property level. And if you're going to headhunt somebody to do a job that you never look at and you never talk to, and it's not going to change anything. I think it's I think it's two-way. And I think we've talked about this even when you look at Gen Z. If you have 25 applications open, you can learn certain jobs just by YouTube. You don't need to do training anymore, for a gazillion years because, oh my God, you're going to put the cutlery on a table. And if you can do more things and you're allowed more flexibility, it's not that people don't want to work at night or in the evening or in the weekend. Everybody has different needs at different times. And I think if once we start looking more with a more flexible approach of where we need the people and when we need them and how we bring together, it comes with something very different than just saying we need 1,500 people in these positions, in these locations, and now we have a problem.
I think just maybe also going back to, Demi, you said, what do employers need to do? Mm-hmm. I think it's, quite frankly, an information education campaign. And we should have done that 30 years ago, if not earlier. Because ultimately, putting aside the passion, the flexibility, remote working opportunities at a corporate level. What really needs to happen is to say, look, to the young talent, these are the opportunities that you can do if you join X, Y, or Z. And here are the different career paths, and not be rigid, right? But if you talk to someone, and maybe a person, for example, we work with hotel investment financial institution that finances properties. Students don't know how to get into these companies. Or if we work with a private equity firm on an asset management search, and students say, well, how do I get there? Well, there are different paths, and it could be operational. It could be on the advisory side first with, the likes of CBRE, Jones Lang, etc. Or you could take a different route. And just the employers have to make a better job or do a better job saying, look, you join us in X, but if you join us in X, here are new ways that you can evolve and develop. And I think that's where currently the system fails.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to a point you made before when you were talking about these firms. They all want someone with a couple of years of experience, et cetera. But just so you know, I steal a lot of your business because I get a lot of companies saying, hey, do you have anyone who's been out for a year and a half or two, has one of these, consulting or development backgrounds, and we need them. And I said, you're the 8th phone call I've gotten this month. You all want that same person. Take one of my graduating students and put them through a 6-month intensive internship, and you will have an employee for the next 5 years who's going to be so dedicated to you because you gave them this opportunity, rather than having to hire the one that's been out a couple of years, and you're going to get that great talent cheaper and before anybody else. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that again out of necessity. And so I think that links to it.
But it's also a question of then recognizing and being fine with it to say, look, you're going to get someone on board and maybe they're going to leave after 3 years.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes.
You can't just constantly think you're going to hire someone, you're going to keep them forever. It's just an old school thinking, right? Which also then means that you constantly have to recruit because you constantly have to replace someone. But that's part of the business. And I think a lot of organizations just haven't caught up with that just yet.
I think it's a great point. Jeff, did you want to add something to that?
It really boils down to empowerment, doesn't it? And when you're looking at the chat questions here, some of these are, it really, this last one that came out about any encouragement for future hoteliers, it's out there. There's a lot of opportunity. Find one that empowers you to let you learn. We talked about the hierarchy, and while it still exists, there's changes there in the sense that people now, CEOs and upper level managers now say, okay, so here's the end result we want. Get there. We're not going to watch you every step of the way. You need to provide this end result. So when you're looking for a job, I would argue, or I would encourage you to look for companies that hire with that mindset of letting you learn. There's going to be mistakes. We know that. But just learn as long as you're making those mistakes in the best interest of the company or the hotel, putting its best face forward.
Great. I see that we're slowly running out of time, and there's a question I want to get to, and if I still have a backup question just in case. But let's spend a little bit of time on this. So you've got this audience of students, right? And we're seeing the questions. They're concerned about the industry, about upward mobility, about being treated a certain way, about giving the chance to learn, finding careers that they want, et cetera. So give them a concrete piece of advice. And please, you know what I'm going to say. I don't want to hear believe in yourself or stick to your guns, or I want a concrete thing. Here is a specific skill you need to get in school or on your own time that's going to differentiate you from everybody else, and it's going to help you succeed in whatever first job you have and advance more quickly. And you can take into account how the industry is shifting. And I'll see what you guys say, and then I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. No, just kidding. Marloes, your hand was up in the air. Go for it.
That's just because I'm reading these comments here. I give you a concrete example. Our head of development today for Europe is 22 years old. He did La Roche. He did his first internship with us. He then stayed with us pretty much evenings and weekends while we were all still working remote. He'd never met any of us. He graduated in July last year, and we gave him the role, and we're actually just increasing his role. But dear God, is he determined. And so, yes, it took us a lot of time to invest in him, but he did the same. And so I've had many young people whose expectation was to kind of, we feed you the program, we set out how it's going to look like. I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow. I not even know where I'm going to be next week. My business is not, this kind of textbook kind of business. I'd say he was one of the first and few who just said, okay, what the heck's going on here? Let me just get the hang of this. And he just went in there. And when he's wrong, he just comes back. And when he believes he's right, he will go and talk to other people. He will try to find it. And he uses his skills of doing research, of doing reports, of doing Excel, which, we've long forgotten. And he follows the process. But he doesn't push it down our throats to say, no, you cannot do this unless. He goes in and looks at different people. He analyzes the situation and talks to the different stakeholders like he would do this in school, but with the sense of reality, with the sense of where he is. And he's built that out so much that when we signed Rome, I'd put my own picture, my own name. I put his in there because he fought for this. He was there. He was the one pushing it. And so, if you have that character and you can really build that out, it's much more difficult if you're introverted. But it's just having that voice and follow through.
Okay, I need to cut you off just because we're running out of time. What I want to take away from that is, you're coming out of school with a set of skills, research skills, writing skills, PowerPoint skills, Excel skills, discussion skills that people that are older may have forgotten some of these things or don't want to do those anymore. And that's an added value if you can put it into a real life context. Thomas, give us a piece of advice.
2 pieces.
Quickly.
Yes. Okay. So firstly, as you've just alluded to, take away the tasks that you're good at, because that's fine. You can easily learn them. Focus on your character traits. So how will you provide success in a specific cultural setting or organization? And that's the chick and the chat model. So it's basically what most organizations are looking for is curious individuals, humble individuals, individuals who have a strong internal locus of control and who are competitive. That means that they're coachable. That means that you can start in one function, but then over time evolve and take on completely different roles. And the chat model essentially speaks to individuals who perhaps are more prone to operational roles, which basically means you want to be conscientious, hospitable, you want to have adaptability and trainability. So think of examples in your interview that display those character traits. And the second piece of advice would be think of your competition. Who else is applying for the roles and how do you differ from people like that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm looking for, very concrete answers. And I think what I want to stress is we hear these words a lot and students might think, oh yeah, everybody says that. But we say it because it is important. The technical skills, the hard skills are important, but ultimately they're hiring you and they're going to spend time with you in that organization, be stuck with you on Zoom calls or on the desk next to them, be someone they want to work with. Lucy, you got 45 seconds. Lucy, give us a very concrete thing that would convince you to hire someone.
So I would say 2 things, and keep it short and sweet, is you want to know that they have passion for that specific organization and that specific role, and they can articulate why it's the right fit for them. And you want somebody who is inherently an entrepreneur, right? That they are going to own their role, that they're going to master their role, and that they're going to do whatever it takes for them to really be successful, right? And so, very often we talk about the onus on companies to kind of develop people and show them the ladder and show them the progression. In all, my different roles in life, I think it's the people that intrinsically will show up every single day with a commitment to do what it takes to learn the right skills, build the right networks, ask the right questions, and do what it takes to deliver a top-class job. Because if you do that, the opportunities for you to progress will automatically come.
Great. Know yourself, know the organization, and seize those opportunities. Jeff, you got 37 seconds.
We had a session earlier today, the future of you. I would also say, understand the power of you. Know your skills, learn your skills, live your skills, love your skills, and you can sell that to potential employers. And once you do that, the doors will open as your career expands. So you may start at something, but you may end up somewhere else because those doors open based on the power of you and your brand.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Marloes. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks to the audience. We got 22 seconds. I'm going to give one last comment, which is I was dreading doing a panel about leadership because I find it this very esoteric term and full of a lot of fluff. But what we were able to do today, I think, is really bring it down and say, here's what we're seeing in terms of leadership, and here's what students need to know to become the industry's next leaders. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you in person for the next YHS. I went over by 2 seconds.
Thank you, Professor Herdari, to our panelists for that great discussion. Personally, I loved hearing about what you just talked about right at the end and how you would want how you would want an employer to do the things that would make them a good leader and fill those roles and own those roles. And as a student here at EHL, it's honestly inspiring hearing you guys speak about that, and I'm excited for my future here.
Absolutely. What a day to kick off YHS 2022.
What a day indeed. From the keynotes to the firesides, and not to mention the panel discussions, it went by so fast. I can't believe we're done already.
You know what they say, Sam? Time flies when you're having fun.
That's right, Ella. Couldn't agree more. I'm looking forward to day 2. How about you?
Absolutely. And before we continue, let's say goodbye to our panelists. And thank you so much for having a wonderful panel. I think we all learned a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You know, Sam, we have so much to look forward to tomorrow. From a keynote from Ms. Ortiguera to the CEO of Pacific Asia Travel Association to a fireside chat with Mr. Miller and Mr. Price and our Before Breaking Ground panel, to name only a few. There's also something especially exciting for our delegates tomorrow. We have the Marriott Delegate session. It's going to be an opportunity for you all to learn and get to know each other a little bit better.
Exciting. There will also be more opportunities for networking tomorrow as well. It's been a pleasure hosting you today. Welcoming, I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow when our speakers will be in person and on campus. This will be the first time in YHS for the past 3 years that we've had speakers here on campus with us, and I'm very excited to have you guys with us tomorrow.
It's going to be an exciting day, especially having our speakers live, like Sam said. We both look forward to welcoming you all back tomorrow morning.
And before we go, if you are a delegate, we will see you at the Dorchester delegate session shortly. Please check your email and WhatsApp for the link to the session. For all other participants, we will see you tomorrow. YHS, over and out.